let's talk about solving inequalities. The nice thing is it's nearly identical to solving equations, so we could just imagine that this is an equal sign. But actually, it's got one complicated little detail. Whoops. Let's talk about solving inequalities. The good news, it's nearly identical to solving equations. The bad news, there's one major difference that you have to remember. So we're looking at this inequality here, and we think, oh, let's go ahead and distribute, and then we'll deal with this. So we'll get 3x plus 2 is less than 20x minus 32. I'm going to try to get my x's all on one side. Do I want them on the left or the right? I don't know. I kind of like them on the left for inequalities, but it really doesn't make a difference. So I'll subtract a 2. All right, and so then I have a negative 17x is less than a negative 34. I'll divide both sides by negative 17, so x is less than 2. So let's just check that works. So 0, 1, 2. So x is less than 2. Okay, cool. So if this is correct, then when I take any value that's in my shaded part, it should make this original inequality true. So let's check that out. So let's take an easy value, like 0. Okay, that should work. So 3 times 0 plus 2, that should be less than 4 times 5 times 0. Okay, so 3 times 0, 0, so 2, is that less than 4 times 5 times 0, so that's 0. So 4 times a negative 8, so that's a negative 32. Oh dear, something went wrong. Yes, it did. Hopefully you guys know. It has to do with this right here. I divided by a negative. So what I have to do is flip my sign. Because then, well, let's plug in a 3, let's say. I think my Apple Pencil is struggling. If I plug in a 3, I'll get a 9 plus a 2, so that's an 11. Is that less than, let's see, 15 minus 8, that's a 7. Is that less than a 28? Sweet. Okay. You gotta know this. When multiplying or dividing by a negative, you must flip the inequality. Let me prove that to you. Take all of these options right here. In the purple, I start with a negative 30 is less than negative 15 with all of these. So in the purple, that's true. Negative 30 is less than negative 15. If I divide by a 5, I would get a negative 6 is less than a negative 3. Is that still true? Yes. Cool. If I add 10 here in the second example, I'd get a negative 20 is less than a negative 5. Is that still true? Yes. If I divide by a negative 5, I would get a 6 is less than a 3. Is that still true? No. So that is telling me that when I divide by a negative, I need to flip my sign. Now, it's true because 6 is greater than 3. Gosh, let's just keep checking. Okay, so dividing by a negative, that makes me nervous. All right, let's look at this fourth example. If I subtract 50 from both sides, negative 80 is less than a negative 65. Yeah, that's still true. What about here? Multiply by 2. Negative 60 is less than a negative 30. That's still true. All right, let's multiply by a negative 2. So 60 is less than 30. I guess I gotta go flip my sign then, because I multiplied by a negative. All right, now it works. So again, when multiplying or dividing by a negative, you have to flip the inequality. Let's test. To flip or not to flip? All right, to flip or not to flip? Let's look at number 1. I'm going to need to divide by a -3. So will I flip my sign? Yes, I am dividing by a negative. So you flip it. Let's look at number 2. I have a 5x is greater than or equal to -30. I'm dividing by a 5, but I am dividing a negative over here. But I'm only dividing by a 5. So you keep it. Do not flip it. Notice it's whether you divide by a negative. So in number 2, I am dividing a negative, but I'm dividing it by a positive. Number 3, I'm going to divide by a -3. Yes, I have to flip the sign. Number 4, yes, you will flip the sign because you're dividing by a negative. Number 5, will you flip it? Yes, you are going to multiply by a -2. So yes, you will flip that sign. Number 6, you are dividing by a -7, so you will flip it. Number 7, here's a -64. I'm going to divide both sides by 8. Keep it the same, because I divided by a positive. Number 8, I'm going to multiply both sides by 2/3. I will keep it, because I am multiplying by a positive. Yes, I realize there's a negative right here, but what am I multiplying to both sides? A positive 2/3.